You called their money crumbs, Nancy, from your freezer. Trump did not speak this loudly. That remained the detail no one anticipated. He had been boisterous the entire evening, boisterous in a manner that consumes a space, the way a storm consumes a canyon. The studio had grown accustomed to his noise, much like someone grows accustomed to street noise when residing near an interstate. However, he delivered this statement quietly, almost softly. It was the tone you use when addressing someone you are no longer furious with, because rage demands optimism, and he had completely moved beyond it. Speaker Nancy Pelosi offered no reply. Her hand drifted toward the pile of paper notes resting next to her drinking glass, and she commenced folding the uppermost sheet. Once, then twice. It was the identical movement, the exact muscle recollection that 25 million viewers had observed on nationwide broadcasts 4 years prior. That was when she creased a separate stack of papers before tearing them down the middle, right behind a commander-in-chief's back within the chambers of the American Congress. Every lens inside the CNN broadcasting room captured the action. The producer situated in the control center saw it, and within living spaces nationwide, individuals who recalled that previous evening witnessed it as well. She creased the paper a third time. Afterward, she placed the document flat upon the desk deliberately, utilizing both hands. It mirrored how an individual puts down an object they understand they will never lift again. She refrained from tearing it. There existed nothing remaining to shred. The CNN host glanced toward his director through the transparent partition. The director offered no gesture in return. There was simply nothing to indicate. The crimson indicator on camera 2 flashed on and off, as consistent as a pulse within a space that had lost its ability to exhale. 90 minutes beforehand, absolutely none of these events had transpired yet. The host initiated the broadcast exactly how CNN perpetually initiated such programs, swift and businesslike. He provided a phrase regarding the structure, a phrase regarding the subject, and a phrase reminding the viewing public that this constituted a special CNN broadcast, airing live from the D.C. headquarters. The topic at hand involved federal responsibility and economic clarity. The debaters included the American President and Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. Between the two of them, they had dedicated more hours debating the nation's destiny than most wedded partners dedicate to arguing over household temperature settings. He directed his attention to the speaker initially. She had asked to begin, and Trump consented, primarily because Trump routinely consented to letting opponents speak first. He had realized decades ago that the initial voice in a venue is rarely the voice the venue remembers. "I appreciate this," Pelosi stated. She sported a dark blue outfit, accompanied by the pearl necklace she perpetually displayed, alongside the grin she had rehearsed before 10,000 lenses throughout her 37 years serving in Congress. "And I thank CNN for organizing this event. I trust in responsibility. I have represented the citizens of the magnificent city of San Francisco for 37 years, and I wish to discuss this evening what economic prudence genuinely resembles when you—" 37 years, Trump interjected. The host pivoted. "Mr. President, we arranged for 2 uninterrupted opening remarks, and the speaker—" I am aware, my apologies." Trump raised a single hand comfortably, resembling a patron dismissing a server. "Proceed, Nancy. 37 years, inform them." However, the sabotage was already finalized, and everybody in the facility recognized it, save for those who actively refused to recognize it. 37 years was currently lingering in the atmosphere directly above Pelosi's head, resembling a visible price label she was unable to stretch up and detach. Whatever words she uttered next would inevitably be filtered through that phrase. She recalibrated. She possessed a talent for recalibrating. 37 years instructs you on how to drop a rhythm and catch the subsequent one without the listeners detecting it. Unfortunately, these listeners were not a media gallery, and the individual opposite her was not a peer who would feign that he hadn't just disrupted her. "Economic prudence," she resumed, "signifies pouring resources into citizens. The Affordable Care Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, the Infrastructure Bill, these represent tangible outcomes, not mere talk." "CHIPS Act," Trump remarked, giving a nod. "We will return to that. If you have ever observed a poker match and witnessed a player place a card face down upon the surface without glancing at it, you comprehend exactly what had just occurred." He flagged it. He refrained from playing it immediately. He placed it where she could view it and then proceeded forward. Consequently, she now had to endure the remainder of the evening aware that it was resting there, face down, anticipating its moment. The host turned toward Trump to prompt his introductory statement. Trump refused to deliver a standard one. He tilted forward, pushing past his audio equipment, stared directly into the live audience, and then peered past them into the broadcasting lens, speaking intimately to the individuals watching from their residences. During 2018, he articulated, we reduced taxes. Consequently, businesses across this entire nation provided financial bonuses to their employees. $1,000, occasionally $2,000, $3,000, genuine currency. Currency that reached genuine individuals performing genuine labor. He pivoted toward Pelosi. Nancy, do you recall what you labeled that currency? Pelosi's grin remained fixed. I stated that the corporate tax reductions were unevenly distributed. 83% of the advantages flowed to the top 1%, and the worker bonuses were insignificant relative to what the corporations— Scraps, Trump interrupted. Relative to what the corporations obtained, which was— You labeled it scraps. $1,000. You positioned yourself before the media, and you labeled $1,000 as scraps. He swiveled back toward the broadcast lens. I wish to question anybody viewing from their home at this exact second. Is $1,000 merely scraps to you? Pelosi tilted forward. This represents precisely the sort of oversimplification. Trump halted. Not because he experienced shock. He halted in the manner a person halts when they discover cash lying on the pavement. He reiterated the term methodically, savoring it, rolling it over. Oversimplification. Pelosi listened to the word exit his lips and recognized what it resonated like beyond the borders of Washington, which heavily contrasted with what it resonated like inside of Washington. She attempted to adjust her trajectory, but she was a single second too slow, and a single second stretches into a full year within a venue such as this. I mean, the legislative debate necessitates nuance, and nuance— Trump nodded. A gentleman loses his employment during a global pandemic. He waits in a food pantry queue for 4 consecutive hours. He receives a $1,000 bonus from his employer, and he utilizes it to repair his heating system so his children avoid freezing in the middle of January. And you, residing in a mansion in Pacific Heights, boasting a net worth of $269 million, you gaze directly into a camera and you label his heating money scraps. He paused deliberately. And whenever somebody highlights that fact, you declare he is oversimplifying things. You claim he requires additional nuance. The host began to interject. Trump pressed onward, not speaking over the host, but rather flowing through the interruption like liquid penetrating a fissure. Here is the detail I desire to know, Nancy. When was the final occasion you were forced to select between repairing the heating system and settling the electrical invoice? Because the gentleman who received those scraps, he faces that exact choice every single winter. He does not require nuance. He requires warmth. Here is the profound truth concerning that specific moment, the truth that the home viewers comprehended long before the individuals inside the broadcasting studio grasped it. Trump was not assaulting her legislation. He was not debating financial theory. He was interpreting her. He was grabbing the vocabulary she utilized daily within the marble corridors of Congress vocabulary, like oversimplification and nuance, and unevenly distributed. And he was suspending them directly adjacent to a malfunctioning heating system in the dead of January. The vast gap between her vocabulary and that heating system represented the entire narrative. He did not even need to declare that she was disconnected from reality. Her own vocabulary declared it on her behalf. Pelosi collected herself. Grant her this. She was never a politician who remained knocked down on the mat. She had endured 37 years inside the most brutal structure in D.C., precisely because she understood how to transform a terrible minute into a victorious hour, and she fully committed to it. You wish to discuss the global pandemic? She challenged, her vocal tone regaining its solid foundation, because launching an offensive was a territory where she held valid credentials. Your administration's handling resulted in the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives. Respirator deficits, diagnostic shortcomings. While you were hosting campaign events, citizens were perishing inside hospital parking garages. Therefore, refrain from lecturing me regarding April of 2020. April 2020, Trump muttered. He delivered it so softly that Pelosi spoke right over it for half a phrase before she recognized that he had completely diverted the flow of the conversation. I recall approving the CARES Act, she forged ahead, the most massive assistance package in April 2020. You appeared on a late-night television program, James Corden. You unsealed your freezing unit on national TV, a $24,000 freezing unit packed entirely with frozen dairy treats, $13 per container. And you stated, here his vocal pitch performed something unusual, something bordering on gentle, a partial mimicry that proved more destructive than overt ridicule precisely because of its accuracy. I am unsure what I would have done if frozen dairy treats had never been created. That represented a humorous segment on a late-night show, Pelosi interjected. Humorous! Trump allowed the term to linger. Do you comprehend what was occurring that exact same week you were being humorous? A food pantry down in San Antonio. A queue of automobiles stretching 4 miles in length. 4 entire miles. Citizens sitting inside their vehicles for 4 agonizing hours simply to acquire a single carton of provisions. And you were on national TV flaunting your frozen treats. If you have ever been forced to wait in a queue you despised waiting in, anticipating a necessity you never should have been forced to anticipate, all while a person who would never endure that queue dictated to you via television what you ought to feel thankful for. Then you comprehend flawlessly what 30 million individuals experienced when they listened to that exchange. Pelosi attempted to push past the topic. I successfully passed the CARES Act, which deposited currency directly into. Let us discuss September, Trump declared. September 2020. Every single beauty parlor in California remained shuttered. Your political faction mandated their closure. Stylists were unable to labor, unable to settle their leases. Patrons were unable to receive a trim for several months. Meanwhile, you strolled into a parlor in San Francisco without a face covering and received a styling session. Pelosi responded rapidly, now on the defensive. That matter has been exhaustively handled. I was entrapped by the parlor, entrapped by a surveillance device that had been situated within the parlor since the initial day it launched. He refrained from smiling. The surveillance devices were not mounted specifically for you, Nancy. They were persistently present. You simply failed to realize they were recording. There it manifested once more. The element the home viewers identified was not merely the double standard itself. They had witnessed double standards previously. What they identified was the instinctual reaction, the I was entrapped defense. The immediate shift from I committed the act to somebody did this to me. They had observed that maneuver 1,000 distinct times from 1,000 distinct lawmakers. And on every single occasion, it translated to the exact same sentiment. I was apprehended and I do not believe I should be required to justify it. Are you aware of what occurred to the parlor proprietor? Trump asked, and his vocal pitch lowered significantly. The theatricality receded, mimicking an ocean tide withdrawing, leaving behind something that was distinctly devoid of performance. Her identity was Erica Cayuse. She adhered to the regulations. She shuttered her enterprise. She complied with what your administration instructed her to execute. And when she displayed the footage of you violating the very regulations you authored, she forfeited absolutely everything. Fatality threats, terrible internet evaluations. She closed her doors permanently. He paused. She adhered to your regulations and forfeited her establishment. You violated your regulations and received a styling session. And subsequently, you labeled her deceitful. The broadcasting room fell silent. It was not the respectful silence of a CNN crowd anticipating the subsequent segment. It was a distinct type of silence. The silence of a space that has just absorbed a statement it is utterly incapable of unhearing. Within the third tier of seating, a gentleman who had remained mute the entire night, a gentleman sporting a marriage band, vision glasses resting on his brow, and the calloused digits of an individual who labors manually, that gentleman shut his eyelids for a brief second. Not out of fury, not out of sorrow, but rather in the specific fatigue of an individual who adhered to every single mandate during the quarantine, who donned the face covering inside the supermarket, even when it caused his vision glasses to steam up, who bypassed his own mother's burial service because the restriction permitted only 10 individuals, and there existed 11 immediate family members, who executed all of those actions because he was informed it was crucial, and who was currently staring at the female leader who informed him it was crucial, brazenly walking into a shuttered parlor lacking a face covering. He was unshocked. He existed beyond the realm of shock. He resided in that territory past astonishment where an individual simply internalizes that the mandates were never intended for absolutely everyone. And that realization carried more weight than any fury he might have harbored instead. And sitting in the third tier beside him, a female possessing silver hair and tiny earrings, the sort of female who had cast ballots for the Democratic Party in 6 consecutive cycles and harbored no intention of ceasing, that female averted her gaze toward her lap. The respectful demeanor she had maintained the whole evening vanished from her visage. Not because she concurred with Trump, but rather because she had just witnessed a critique that genuinely lacked a valid counter-argument. And she had existed in the political sphere long enough to comprehend exactly what absolute silence implies. Trump added, almost as a secondary thought, mimicking how an angler throws a lure he has no immediate intention of pulling back. However, the parlor merely represents the minor regulation you violated. The massive one we have not yet touched upon. Pelosi stiffened her posture. She was far from concluded. She had not endured 3 decades by surrendering territory, so she deployed the most formidable munition in her stockpile, the one she had been holding in reserve, the one that proved successful in every single space she had ever deployed it in. "You wish to discuss responsibility," she stated, her tone turning rigid. The pearl-wearing grandmother persona vanished. The formidable Speaker of the House returned. "You faced impeachment on 2 occasions. You provoked an assault upon the United States Capitol structure. You?" "Exonerated," Trump interjected. "On 2 occasions. Exonerated. By your specific political faction refusing to..." "Exonerated. You pursued impeachment. The deciding body exonerated. That represents exactly how the framework operates, Nancy. You have operated inside the framework for 37 years. You comprehend the procedures." He allowed the statement to settle, then proceeded before she could mount a defense. "However, considering you raised the topic of that evening inside the Capitol, considering you raised the topic of that specific chamber, let us discuss exactly what you executed inside that chamber. February of 2020, the State of the Union address." "I shredded a document filled with falsehoods," Pelosi retorted, "and I would readily execute it." "You shredded a national address." Trump's vocal tone shifted for the initial moment that evening. He was no longer engaging in theater. The retaliatory fighter lowered his boxing equipment. What remained exposed was level, weighty, and motionless. "Do you comprehend exactly what was contained inside the address you shredded?" "An address saturated with deceptive," Pelosi began. "Charles McGee," Trump stated. "He delivered the name in the manner one delivers the name of an individual they are indebted to. 100 years of age, one of the final remaining Tuskegee Airmen. He piloted combat operations during the Second World War precisely so that you could occupy the seat you currently occupy. He was present in the viewing balcony that evening. I paid tribute to him." The entire legislative chamber rose. Both political factions. Pelosi parted her lips. "Amy Williams," Trump pushed forward, his voice diminishing in volume now rather than increasing, which served as the indicator that the moment had turned genuine. Because Trump lowered his volume when situations became profoundly real, similar to how a waterway silences just prior to a massive plunge. A spouse of a military member. Her partner was stationed over in Afghanistan. She remained unaware that we were transporting him back. He stepped out from behind the balcony barricade. She laid eyes on him. She had not embraced him in 7 entire months. She embraced him, and she wept. And the entire chamber wept alongside her. Both political factions wept. He locked his gaze onto Pelosi, directly onto her. Refusing to look at the broadcast lens, refusing to look at the audience, refusing to look at the host, directly at her. "And when the address concluded, you stood up directly behind my back, and you shredded absolutely all of that right down the middle." He paused. "You did not shred my personal address, Nancy. You shredded Charles McGee. You shredded that emotional reunion. You shredded a century-old veteran who piloted combat operations so you could possess the luxury of occupying that seat and openly disagreeing with me. That address functioned as a political campaign event masquerading as a," Pelosi argued. "And you declared it was," Trump interrupted. "And I am citing your exact words. The polite action to take considering the alternative." Trump halted. "Shredding a century-old combat hero constitutes politeness. I would be fascinated to discover exactly what the alternative entailed." The broadcasting studio ceased breathing. The host refrained from interrupting. Not a single individual on the CNN commentary team in the neighboring studio uttered a single syllable. And subsequently, when they reviewed the recording, not a single one of them could pinpoint the exact second they had ceased writing down observations. They only realized that at a certain juncture they had, and their writing instruments were still clutched in their grips, but they were entirely motionless. And here resides exactly what Pelosi desired to articulate. She desired to articulate that she had dedicated herself to her nation as well. She desired to articulate that serving as the initial and sole female to wield the speaker's wooden mallet carried significance. And it genuinely did carry significance, and absolutely nobody in that venue would dispute its significance. She possessed 10 distinct rebuttals for 10 distinct allegations, and every single one of them was technically accurate, verifiable, and justifiable within any editorial column in any publication across the nation. However, she was not situated inside a publication. She was situated inside a venue, and the technically accurate rebuttal to, "You shredded a century-old veteran," constitutes no rebuttal whatsoever, because you are incapable of fact-checking an emotion. And the emotion filling that venue was not a problem her 37 years of experience had educated her on how to rectify. The host, to his personal merit, attempted to navigate the conversation. Let us shift to the subject of congressional equity investments, a matter that has sparked bipartisan worry. Both factions have demanded an excellent subject, Trump affirmed. He gestured toward Pelosi. Nancy, you brought up the CHIPS Act previously. You stated you felt immense pride regarding it. Explain to me exactly what it accomplishes. Pelosi, treading cautiously now, assessing the terrain for hidden snares. It directed $52 billion into national semiconductor production to decrease our reliance on foreign. $52 billion directed into semiconductors. Which specific corporations profited the absolute most? Various American technology enterprises profited from NVIDIA, Trump interjected. You are aware it was NVIDIA. Everyone viewing from their residences can research it. NVIDIA equity skyrocketed immediately following the CHIPS Act. He paused. Nancy, does your spouse possess any NVIDIA equity? My spouse formulates his independent financial decisions. I maintain zero participation in and hold zero prior awareness of. Zero prior awareness, Trump echoed the term. He delivered it in the manner a gentleman inspects an expiration label on a milk container he already recognizes has spoiled. You serve as the Speaker of the House. You possess knowledge regarding which legislation will hit the voting floor long before the nation realizes it. You possess knowledge regarding which sectors will secure $52 billion long before the financial markets realize it. And your spouse, utterly autonomously, possessing zero prior awareness, purchases contracts in that precise sector, involving that precise corporation, at the precise moment, directly preceding your yes vote on that precise legislation. He pivoted toward the broadcast lens. If you executed that action, do you comprehend the consequences? The SEC contacts you. The FBI knocks on your door. You are incarcerated in a penitentiary. He pivoted back toward Pelosi. You appear on CNN and declare the accusation is absurd. Pelosi attempted the redirection she had rehearsed. The commander-in-chief himself has revealed hundreds of millions of dollars in equity transactions during his time in the Oval Office. And if we intend to engage in a truthful dialogue regarding I transact, Trump confirmed, without a doubt. The distinction? I refrain from voting on policies that directly influence the equities I purchase. You absolutely do, Pelosi countered. There has never materialized any proof, and the New York Times verified that I have never. National Bureau of Economic Research released a detailed analysis. Legislative commanders beat the financial markets by a margin of 47%. Trump permitted the statistic to suspend in the air. 47%, Nancy. Warren Buffett fails to achieve 47. Investment portfolio directors fail to achieve 47. Yet the legislative branch manages it. And you, miraculously, perform even superior to the rest of the legislative branch. I entirely endorse prohibiting legislative equity transactions. I have declared openly that I endorse. Trump ceased speaking and subsequently he chuckled. It was not a vicious chuckle, not a campaign event chuckle. It was a startled chuckle, the variety a gentleman emits when he is utterly incapable of believing the statement he just absorbed, and the astonishment is deeply authentic. You endorse prohibiting it currently, after you no longer hold the speaker position, after the transactions have concluded, after the funds are secured in the financial institution. He slowly moved his head from side to side. Nancy, you endorse prohibiting equity transactions in the exact same manner a gentleman who just concluded his evening meal endorses prohibiting evening meals. And here resides the truth concerning the chuckle that erupted from the live CNN audience, the truth that Pelosi grasped prior to its conclusion. It erupted from a CNN audience, her broadcasting network, her personal venue, her demographic. And if your personal venue chuckles at your expense, there exists no preparation lounge to withdraw into. There exists no subsequent media conversation you can provide the following day to force them to unhear it. There exists no editorial column, no factual verification, no media representative that can salvage it. Your personal venue listened to you and they chuckled. And that specific noise will pursue you a greater distance than any published headline, because published headlines are capable of being amended, but a genuine chuckle is incapable of being withdrawn. Pelosi attempted one final push regarding the transactions. Her vocal tone sounded weaker currently, yet the foundational architecture remained intact, remaining businesslike, remaining undeniably Washington. The legislative branch passed the Stock Act during 2012 to tackle this precise anxiety. Representatives are mandated to reveal transactions within a 45-day window. My spouse and I have comprehensively adhered to every single revelation mandate. Every single exchange is accessible public data. 45 days, Trump observed. You receive 45 days to inform the public regarding your acquisitions. Do you comprehend what 45 days represents, Nancy? It represents an adequate period for an equity asset to surge 30% before a single individual realizes you possess it. That does not equate to clarity. That equates to a massive head start. He pivoted toward the broadcast lens. If your employer granted himself 45 days to justify his personal reimbursement account, you would label that precisely what it represents. However, when the legislative branch crafts the exact identical loophole for its own members, they label it the Stock Act, and they broadcast it within a media announcement. The legislative member from Missouri has presented a proposal to fortify, titled in your honor, Trump stated, the Pelosi Act. The proposal to prohibit legislative equity transactions is literally titled in your honor, not because you championed it, rather because you serve as the exact justification it is necessitated. The host adjusted his posture in his seat. He had functioned as a media professional for 22 years, and he had facilitated 9 of these specific programs, and he recognized precisely when a live feed had transitioned beyond the structure he had organized for and breached a territory where the structure was completely obsolete. He refrained from attempting to navigate again. A female situated in the 4th tier of seating, a legislative assistant who had labored under a Democratic politician for 11 years and genuinely maintained faith in the mission. That female compressed her lips tightly and stared at the ground. Not because Trump possessed accuracy regarding every single topic, but rather because she had personally processed those exact financial revelation documents for years, and she had observed the transaction dates, and she had perpetually remained silent. And the chuckle echoing within the venue represented the noise of additional individuals ultimately acknowledging the reality she had been feigning ignorance of. If you have ever recognized an ethical failing at your place of employment and remained silent because the financial compensation carried more weight than the moral foundation, you comprehend flawlessly what that specific female experienced. And if you have ever witnessed somebody ultimately articulate the truth you felt incapable of articulating inside a venue where it genuinely held significance, you comprehend precisely why she stared at the ground. She stared at the ground because raising her gaze equated to finalizing a verdict, and she remained unprepared to finalize a verdict. Not on this specific night. However, the inquiry lingered inside the venue presently, and it refused to depart whenever the broadcasting equipment eventually powered down. Pelosi collected herself for a final stand. I have successfully navigated more legislative measures than any speaker in contemporary history. I shielded the Affordable Care Act. I constructed alliances that 37 years, Trump murmured, and his vocal tone had grown incredibly quiet now, bordering on sorrowful. And the sorrow proved more devastating than the fury, because she comprehended how to combat fury, but she remained entirely unequipped to combat sorrow. 37 years. Exactly how many individuals are slumbering upon the concrete pavement within your specific zone this very evening, Nancy? The unhoused crisis represents a nationwide emergency that demands an exhaustive, within your specific zone, the identical one you have championed for 37 consecutive years. Your metropolis expends $400 million annually on the unhoused crisis, increasing amounts each subsequent year, and each subsequent year the situation deteriorates. He paused. 37 years, and the situation deteriorates. Yet your personal financial portfolio failed to deteriorate. Your personal financial portfolio performed exceptionally brilliantly. We ought to, the host interjected faintly. Trump's voice hovered barely above a murmur presently. You declare you are a servant of the public. 37 years of public servitude. You entered the legislative branch. You lacked vast riches. Presently, you possess $269 million. Meanwhile, your zone continues to have citizens slumbering upon the concrete pavement. He locked his gaze onto her, refusing to look at the broadcast lens, refusing to look at the audience, directly at her. Exactly who was being served, Nancy? The absolute quiet following that inquiry was fundamentally distinct from the quiet of a venue anticipating a response. It constituted the quiet of a venue that had already obtained its response, and subsequently, remarkably gently, resembling the manner you shut a novel you have completely finished absorbing. You labeled their cash scraps, Nancy, directly from your icebox. Speaker Nancy Pelosi offered zero verbal reply. Her hand shifted. And at a later point, when media commentators reviewed the footage moment by moment across 3 distinct channels, they would observe that her hand shifted long before her conscious intellect did, resembling how a physical form recoils a fraction of a second before the neural network registers agony. She reached toward the pile of paper notes resting next to her drinking glass, and she commenced folding, once. The sharp noise of a document creasing inside a space so profoundly hushed that the climate control system was audible. Twice. The identical crease, the identical hands, the identical female who had creased a separate address during a separate evening before a separate collection of broadcasting lenses, prior to shredding it into fragments that resonated like an item that would never be reconstructed. Every single individual inside that broadcasting facility witnessed it. The host witnessed it. The camera operator on Unit 2 witnessed it and narrowed his visual framing without requiring an instruction. And within living spaces spanning from Scranton all the way to San Antonio, the individuals who recalled that specific evening 4 years prior witnessed the reverberation of it presently. The physical recollection of a female whose most renowned action involved demolition, reaching for a document during a second of defeat, and discovering that the physical action had tracked her here, to this specific desk, to this specific evening where it translated to something entirely contrary. She creased it a third time, and afterwards she placed it down flat upon the desk, utilizing both hands, delicately, resembling the manner an individual puts down an object they comprehend they will never lift again. She refrained from shredding it, not during this occurrence, not necessarily because she opted not to, but rather because nothing remained inside the physical action itself. The shredding action had represented her authority previously. On this evening, it represented merely an instinctual twitch, the ghost appendage of a presiding officer who no longer served as presiding officer, reaching for a wooden mallet that was completely absent. The host cleared his throat. Speaker Pelosi, do you wish to supply a response? She gazed at the creased document resting upon the desk. She articulated, I believe the citizens of America can observe precisely what is unfolding here. But they certainly could. That constituted the core dilemma. They could observe flawlessly what was unfolding, and what they observed starkly contrasted with what she desired them to observe. The broadcast program concluded 14 minutes prior to the 11th hour. The CNN control center remained hushed in the exact manner that control centers remain hushed, following a live production that ventured into territory nobody had mapped out for it to venture. The lead director leaned back inside his seat. A subordinate video editor positioned beside him inquired, Exactly how do we trim that down for the 11 o'clock segment? The lead director remained silent for a brief span, then he replied, We refuse to trim it. We broadcast the entire segment. He comprehended that excising a single second would appear as a defensive maneuver. It would appear as though CNN was guarding an insider. Consequently, they would broadcast every solitary minute, every single silence, every exact crease of that document. And the unedited version would prove far more damaging for Pelosi than any potential trim could have managed, because a trimmed version can face allegations of unfairness. But the unvarnished reality contains zero unfairness. It merely exists there, and citizens observe it, and they formulate their independent conclusions. Within Kettering, Ohio, a female named Ruth was seated inside her living space. The television set remained illuminated, yet the audio was silenced now, casting a sapphire glow across the space she had occupied with her spouse for 41 years, before he passed away the prior spring season. She was 68 years of age. She had been employed as an accountant for a modest manufacturing firm for 23 years. And back in 2018, she had obtained a $1,000 bonus following the tax reductions. She had utilized it to cover the cost of her spouse's blood pressure pharmaceuticals for a 3-month span because their medical coverage failed to handle the entirety of it. And the agonizing choice was either the pharmaceuticals or repairing the water boiler. And she had selected the pharmaceuticals, and the water boiler had remained broken until the month of March. She absorbed the term scraps this evening, and she refrained from weeping, and she refrained from yelling toward the television set. She merely remained seated, incredibly motionless, immersed in the sapphire glow, with her hands resting upon her lap. Because currently she recognized a truth. Not merely suspected, not merely sensed. She recognized the truth. The female who uttered that specific term had never, for a single moment in her existence, sat adjacent to a kitchen counter possessing a computing device and a stack of invoices, and selected which specific ones to settle that month, and which specific ones to shove back inside the storage compartment. Not for a single moment. And it was audible directly inside the term itself. You could hear the vast detachment contained within it. Scraps. The vocabulary of a female who had never positioned herself near enough to a loaf to comprehend what actual scraps physically resemble. She refrained from deactivating the television set. She merely remained seated there within the quietude, immersed in the sapphire glow, and following a span of time, she stretched her arm over, grabbed the telephone device, and dialed her child. And when her child answered the connection, Ruth asked, "Did you observe the broadcast?" And her child replied, "Affirmative." And neither of the two females uttered an additional word for approximately 10 seconds, which constitutes an eternity on a telephone connection. And subsequently, her child stated, "I feel relieved my father avoided hearing that specific term." And Ruth replied, "He actually did. He absorbed it back in 2018. He merely refrained from verbalizing any response." Beyond the doors of the CNN headquarters, Trump exited via the lateral doorway. No media gauntlet, no triumphant stroll. A CNN broadcast technician, a youthful male sporting a collared shirt displaying a CNN emblem, bearing audio equipment draped across his collarbone, was positioned in the corridor. He ought not to have communicated anything. He recognized he ought not to have communicated anything. He was employed by the organization, and the organization maintained strict guidelines, and those guidelines operated for justifications he comprehended and broadly honored. But when Trump strolled by, the technician offered a nod, incredibly subtle. The specific variety of nod an individual delivers when they desire absolutely nobody else to perceive it. The specific variety of nod that signifies absolutely nothing, and simultaneously absolutely everything, depending heavily upon exactly who happens to be looking. Trump delivered a nod in return. He refrained from pausing. He refrained from speaking. He strolled toward his transport inside the crisp Washington evening, moving beyond the broadcasting vehicle and the thick wires and the unlit glass panes of a structure where in some elevated room, a female was currently collecting her paper documents from a desk, creasing them a final time. Stowing them inside a carrier she would haul into a transport that would convey her toward a residence that held greater monetary value than the vast majority of the residences in the vast majority of the municipalities that had just observed her via television. Trump refrained from glancing backward toward the structure. He possessed zero need to do so. He had successfully deposited exactly what he arrived to deposit, directly upon that specific desk, illuminated by those specific lamps, broadcasted on her personal network situated inside her personal venue. And it would undoubtedly remain there when the dawn arrived, and the subsequent dawn following that one, and the subsequent dawn following that one, sustaining its presence long after the broadcasting studio fell pitch black, and the recording lenses were stowed away, and the seating was piled up adjacent to the barrier. He deposited it in the singular location it proved incapable of being altered. He deposited it squarely inside the absolute silence that arrived following an inquiry she failed to answer.